warming up. There we go. So, well, first, webhooks seem like a pretty simple, perhaps slightly niche aspect of web development, but it's basically just another way to send messages backwards and forwards, right? Well, that's true, but it can be a lot more than that. It's also a powerful architectural construct that can completely change the way you build your apps. But before we get into that, let's just step back for a second. So, rather than just being a simple kind of transport mechanism, simple HTTP post request, I had my notes on the front slide instead of on this slide. That's all right. You lost the transition. My bad. So anyway, thinking about integrations for the moment, what are our options for integrating with other websites? When you boil it down, there's kind of two main ways you can communicate for information, that you want to get from another service. You can either poll them until it's ready, or you can use webhooks. So polling is basically like, for example, calling Sal's Pizza and asking if they can send you a slice of pizza. They say they don't have any at the moment, but they might have some a bit later on. So you call back and you check every couple of minutes. You figure that must be pretty annoying for them, so maybe you use an exponential back-off strategy. Meanwhile, you're making calls. You hang up the phone after yet another rejection, saying your pizza's not ready yet. And you don't realize this at the time, but your pizza's finished a couple of seconds after you hang up the phone. But due to your exponential back-off strategy, you wait another 10 minutes to call again, and now your pizza's cold. So webhooks work more like Sal's, just sending you a fresh slice of pizza every evening when it's ready. You don't have to make a phone call. They just send it to you. No need to waste your valuable time. So with webhooks, you can sit back, relax, knowing you'll have a steady supply of pizza delivered from the oven. Perfect. That's the benefits of using webhooks right there. So what are the main strengths, right? They're flexible and efficient. You can use webhooks to deliver updates on basically any kind of message and pretty close to real time. If you want true real time, you might be better to use broadcasting when you're doing kind of first-party implementations. But webhooks will get you kind of within a couple of seconds at least of the action. It's usually a good solution for your third-party messages if you're integrating with others. And also it can be for dealing with side effects for your own applications. Like sending emails or notifications or storing analytics or firing off image encoding jobs, etc. Basically any side effect that you can turn into a microservice, you could use webhooks to trigger them. Compared with polling, webhooks give you, they're much more resource efficient. Obviously you don't have to respond to incessant check-ins. Developers don't have to write all the polling code. Checker doesn't have to schedule the polling. You don't have to pay bandwidth costs for repeated calls, etc., etc. And you can make your applications a lot more fault tolerant. You can quite easily set things up to get an audit trail of webhook events that have failed, what the status codes were, what the responses were. You can easily set up automated retries or fire off failed jobs again manually after the fact. And we'll go into a bit more detail about how you can achieve that in Laravel in a bit. If you're building a webhook server, you also get more flexibility from the architecture. So, for example, all of your models in Laravel fire a standard set of events, right? You can use observers to listen to those events. You can fire off webhooks for any kind of model creation, updates, deletes, that sort of stuff. And that means, what that means is you can make changes to what your app does without making changes to your primary API's code base. So you can also use it to turn on or off different side effects in your app just by flicking a status field. So we'll get into, again, how you can achieve that. All that sounds really good. I want that. I like that too, but it's not happening. Not in COVID times. But what are our options for making all this a reality in our own projects? As it turns out, actually getting started with both receiving and sending webhooks in Laravel is really easy. There's two really good packages for it, built by Spatty. So they're a fairly prolific development company in Belgium. Chances are you've probably come across their stuff, but if you haven't, go check it out. The first package is the Webhook Client. So that gets you started with receiving webhooks from third parties. It'll help you verify request signatures, process payloads and queued jobs and all that stuff. Makes it pretty easy. The second one is a Webhook Server, and that allows you to send outgoing webhooks. It assists you with strategies for signing calls, retries if you've got errors going on, among other things. So today we're mostly going to focus on the server implementation. You'll find the client stuff is really easy to set up and it's pretty simple. But this is the one which gives you the most benefit for your own kind of system architectures. So let's say, for example, we've got an internal app. Whenever a new team user signs up, we need to send them a message in Slack, right? A welcome message. Say, hi, welcome to the team. With webhooks, you could approach this by setting up a microservice for sending that Slack notification. When a new team member is created in your app, your API fires off the webhook. That invokes a serverless function, which then sends the welcome message to your new user. At first glance, this seems a bit more complicated than how you'd traditionally approach this with a Laravel app. But if you dive a little deeper into the architecture, there's a few benefits to the way we're doing, the way we could do things here. Firstly, your application doesn't need to know anything about the Slack integration. There's no additional dependencies for this function in your code base. So when it comes time to update to Laravel 9, there's fewer things to worry about, fewer external dependencies to wait on for third parties to update. And if you spread that over like potentially dozens of integrations or side effects in your apps, you've probably saved yourself a dozen new dependencies or libraries. The serverless function is a small standalone piece of code, so it's quite easy to understand, and it does one thing, and that makes it much more easily testable and more easily updatable. So all that piece of code does in this case is it takes your webhook request from your API, reformats it for Slack and fires it through. It's a very small little shim. Because it's a cloud serverless function, it scales automatically. So particularly if you're using something like AWS Lambda or Firebase Cloud Functions or Google Cloud, well, you know, Firebase, Google, whatever. It's the same thing under the hood. And the third point is, you know, if you need to make changes to that Slack integration, let's say Slack's updated their API and given you no warning and it's Friday, you can simply just disable the microservice while you resolve the issue. And in the meantime, you won't have lost any of your webhook calls because they've been queuing up and you've got them in the system as failed webhook, as failed calls. So they can either automatically, periodically retry in the background, or you can fire them off again once you've resolved and deployed the new update and re-enabled the service. So as you can see from this picture, the architecture gives your APIs huge flexibility and agility. You can launch entire new pieces of functionality by writing a new microservice and registering a webhook in your app. So maybe you need a new email notification, or you need to store some data for analytics, or whatever it is. Just register a new webhook, write that small function, away you go. No major code changes to your API, no deployments, no new dependencies to worry about. Firing off webhooks, it's really easy. After you install the Webhook Server, you just create a new webhook call. You define the URL, the payload, and a secret for signing the request, and send it off. So by default, these will automatically run in your default queue, but you can customize that in your config, along with your request signing method, timeouts, retry limits, back-off strategies, all that stuff is fully customizable. All this becomes a lot more powerful when you have a built-in webhook registry capable of three critical things. So one is a link to Laravel events, so that you can easily fire webhooks from any system event that you fire in Laravel. Number two is a registry of webhook endpoints to call when specific events are fired. And number three is traceability logging of webhook requests and responses. So that allows you to subscribe specific webhook calls to any combination of events, and we've put together a package that wraps the Spatty Webhook server and implements the registry functions for your app. So let's have a wee look at how that works. It's the same slide from last time. Right, we'll get out of here. So we've got, just go mirroring. Okay. So I've got a little Laravel app which I've set up here, and this is basically just a fresh checkout. There's nothing special in there. You'll see the doxel stuff, which I've talked about before, but that's basically just a way of running things in a container locally. You can do that however you normally do your development. But when you see me using the fin command, that's just kind of shorthand for executing something within the container of or the context that it's running in. So you just use whatever your normal commands are. So first thing we're going to do is install the library from with Composer. Now I'm probably, I am connected to the Wi-Fi. So hopefully, thanks to Composer 2, we won't be waiting here forever. And once that's installed, we'll then publish the config files from this. You can also publish the migrations. The package allows you to completely switch out the models that you're using and all that. But for now, we'll just do the config files. Almost there. Cool. So now we've got a config file, hopefully, which defines the models that we're going to use for different things. So you can see here we've got 3 different models. We've got one for tracking your webhook endpoints, one for binding events to an endpoint, and one for logging your requests. The reason we have endpoint and event as two separate things that are split out is, that's part of the power of webhooks, right? You can have one URL that accepts your requests, that handles multiple different events, and then kind of splits them up and processes them however you like. Or, for example, you might have several events that are quite similar in nature, like for our user example, when you create or update a user, you might have an action that you want to execute on, when either of those events happen. And it could be the same action dealing with the same piece of data. So, for example, if you're trying to say store analytics and work out what the most common first name is in your office, then you could write a webhook that accepts both the create and the update or saving event. So we will next run our migrations. So obviously the package exposes a set of migrations. We'll open up the database, and we can see those three tables in there now. Here's one I prepared earlier. Whoops, I didn't. I'll migrate fresh. Here we go. There we go. That's more like it. So we've got our endpoints, events, and requests table. They're all pretty simple, straightforward tables. Then, for the purposes of this demo, we're going to use this handy little Webhook debugging site. So if you go to webhook.site, it will generate a random UUID for you, and you can use this unique URL to test and debug, right? So you can see any requests that come through into here. It's quite handy. It also will persist stuff for you, and it's completely free to use the basic functionality. So let's go in and register the webhook for the site. Quite a simple call. You just use the facade, webhook registry, register endpoint. You can give it whatever name you like, and obviously the webhook URL itself. There we go. We check the database. We should see it in there. That's good. Next, we will create a new model, right? So we're gonna just fire off a model event and see how that comes through. So we'll make our model. Whoops, better exit Tinker there. So that's created our model and our pizzas table migration. We'll go into our new model, make a new field. Fillable. So we've got a name field that's fillable, and we'll go to our migration and add that name field in. Migrate up. Cool, so now we should have our pizzas table with a name. It's good. Then we'll make a pizza. Who knew this was going to turn into a baking course, right? Or a cooking, or whatever. Right, so grab that, make a meat lover's pizza. So obviously, if we go back over here, you'll see that no webhooks have been sent yet, and that's because we haven't bound our event, so we haven't even made an event yet. So what we'll do is we will make our made pizza event. So this is, keep doing that. So this is, obviously one way. You could hook into the native model events under the hood, or you can hook into any kind of custom event. We're going to do a kind of hybrid approach where we'll use the model to drive the event, and then hook into a custom event that we've pushed from the model. Make sense? So we should have a made pizza event. Now Laravel is going to give us a whole bunch of broadcasting stuff by default, which I'll just replace. So you can see what I'm doing here is I've created a context property on this event, and when the event gets fired, it will accept a pizza model, and we're going to store only the name and the created at timestamp for that pizza. That's all we want to expose in this event. You could put whatever you want there. You could put the whole model. Doesn't matter. It's up to you. If you put the whole model, the Webhooks library will run to array on it. So much the same as you would with an API or whatever. Okay, so next up we're going to add the contracts and the traits. That this will tell our Webhook library to listen to this event and how to deal with it. So you get this contract should deliver webhooks, right? So anything that implements that contract, we will try to deliver as a webhook. We also give you this trait, which gives you all of the kind of base kind of setup. You can fully customize this. So if we have a quick look at the GitHub Webhook Registry, add the docs in here. These methods in here. You can see, the contract expects these methods, and you can override any of them to completely change the behavior if you need to. But we give you kind of, sensible defaults out of the box. So one of those sensible defaults is to read the context property and send that as part of your payload, and to read the event name and send that as a part of the event payload. You can override all that. So let's just make sure our model knows how to fire this event. Again, you can use whatever mechanism to fire the event that you like. This is just what I'm doing for demo purposes. So we're going to use our made pizza event, and we're going to dispatch it when the pizza is created. Cool? Easy as. Right. Next up, we need to register the event to our webhook endpoint. So right now we've got a webhook endpoint that isn't listening to any events. So we want to specifically say, okay, we're listening to this event for this endpoint. Again, you could register however many different endpoints you want and listen to whatever events you want against each endpoint. So that was Tinker. Now, first argument here is the ID, and I know it's 1, so you'd probably use a more sensible way of determining that in your code. But and of course, the second is the name or namespace of the event that you're of the event class that you're listening to. So now let's make a pizza. Make another one, pepperoni this time. So if we jump over here, we should see that come through. So we've fired off a webhook. It's come in. It's been received by the service, and this is the content that the library just put together for us. As you can see, it's got the event name, which is just the class name by default. Again, you can override that. you just set the webhook event name property, and it will, you can use dot notation or whatever kind of public notation you like to set up your events. We've got the context. So that was that context property that we stored with only the name and the created at. And we've got a triggered by, and because I'm not authenticated, it's just put nobody system. But if you were authenticated, that would be your user ID, right? Of the person who fired that action. Again, everything in there fully customizable. If you want to override the context, which property that comes from, or how you build that, you can overload the get webhook context function in your event. If you want to overload the whole payload, you can do that also, and that will be whatever gets passed to the Spatey Webhooks Server plugin. So you can have a look at that plugin to see what the options are there, particularly around tags for tracking with Horizon and that sort of thing. So the next thing that we can see, if we have a look in the database, let me see our two pizzas. You can also see in here that we've recorded the payload that we sent and the response body, right? So can't really see that unless I do this. Select the row. So you can see the message has responded with thanks, IP address, and that's because the webhook site lets you put in whatever response body or response type you like, so you can debug your kind of error scenarios, that sort of thing. So you get that nice audit trail, and again, because we're recording that payload, it makes it really easy to fire off that webhook again if you need to for debugging purposes or for error recovery purposes. Make sense? So that's pretty much it. It's pretty simple, and now we've got a huge amount of power with how we approach our webhooks. You might be able to set up a AWS Lambda, set of cloud functions, set up an API gateway to route your requests into there, and then using this registry, all you have to do is register new webhooks when you're adding new functionality to your app. So you can kind of see how powerful that can be. So if you've got a big API that has lots uptime requirement or whatever, you can ship new functionality without even touching your API. Pretty cool. Any questions? Yep, so that's built into the Laravel Webhook Server package. So you can see in this config file here, they've got a backoff strategy, so that just by default uses exponential backoff. It will try for 3 times, but you publish that config file and you can change that to whatever you like. Yep. And it will each log in here you'll see has a UUID, so you can use that to trace through your requests. So if you're worried about tracing the whole kind of request lifecycle and everything that happens from that request, you could use a middleware to generate that UUID, inject it, and then you've got full logging, full traceability for that whole request and whatever webhooks that fired off. If this was an error, you would have multiple entries, multiple failed entries in here for that webhook, and it would tell you, what attempt number it is, that sort of stuff, what the error was for each one. So if you've got third parties who you're allowing to register webhooks against your API, you can show them that information and show them what they're doing wrong. Yeah. I don't think there really is. Like, I think it's actually reasonably comparable. If anything, polling is probably slightly more work for you to set up on your end. It's probably a bit easier for them to set up, but that's likely because they don't have a modern infrastructure, a modern event-based, pattern in their code. So yeah. Yeah, so again in the Spatey package, they fire off events. Where is it? Yeah, these events here. So they've got specific events that you can listen to: webhook call succeeded, webhook call failed, final webhook call failed. So you can hook into those to do whatever you like. One of our dev days. Oh, sorry. Yep. So the question was, when did I create that package? Well, actually, Craig did the first version of it. And then I took it over. Stole his thunder. No, I did the first version of it in one of our dev days, actually, last year, end of last year. Yeah. So we're using that in production? Yeah, we've got one of our systems is using this in production now. Yeah. Soon to be more. Yep, so that's something that I want to add to the library as a job that you can schedule easily. I haven't done anything like that yet, but it is a relatively simple job that you can write if you need it. Oh, cool. Cool, yeah. So there you go, there's a good solution. Cool.